If we're thinking about the linkage of rewards and performance, one of the things that we should be clear about is that there is not necessarily going to be a one-size-fits-all approach. That the idea of things like performance-related pay, merit pay schemes, which from time to time emerge as being the flavour of the month, that these are the things that all good organisations should do. Given the state of evidence, we should perhaps take a step back and think in a more measured way about whether this kind of approach makes sense in every organisational situation. So we need to reflect, what is our organisational situation? What is the nature of the performance across our organisation? What's the nature of performance at the level of individuals? And whether we can make some more reasoned choices about how we can make use of different types of reward approaches that are going to be more appropriate in certain situations rather than others. So, if we were to think about this issue, about the nature, to start with, of organisational performance, and we see different types of organisational situations. That for some organisations, the nature of the organisation's performance is that it's fairly stable. It carries on, much as it does, much as it has always done from year to year. That there are relatively few swings in overall corporate performance, where product markets are relatively stable, where things just simply don't change. Other organisations are dramatically different. So for some organisations, their performance will swing dramatically from year to year. That one year they may be riding high, next year they may be down into the doldrums. So there are big differences. Similarly, when we look at the nature of individual performance within organisations, the nature of that performance will differ. There are, vastly different situations, vastly different expectations that we might have of individual employees. So for some employees, we may have a very clear idea about what the nature of their performance is. It's relatively stable. We can easily measure it. And so that makes it easy for us to be able to identify when somebody is really exceeding that, or when someone's not achieving the expectations that we might have for them. On the other hand, other types of work, other types of employees, their performance is much less clear. Their performance will naturally be unstable because it's affected by circumstances, the nature of the work, that there are all kinds of variables that affect their performance. That there will be, employees will be dealing with changing objectives, that employees maybe have levels of performance or types of performance that is not easy to discern because it's not easily quantifiable, it's more qualitative in nature. So it's an unclear picture about the nature of performance, that different organisations, different employees, what performance means in those situations is very different. So, how can we approach issues of reward design in all of these different situations? So, if we were to think about the nature of organisational performance first, if we have a situation where organisations have very high levels of variability within in terms of their performance, then one of the things that we might do is to look at providing some degree of stability in terms of pay. Because if the background noise of organisational performance is something that might go up or down, then it would be seen as unfair or inequitable to locate the rewards of individual employees in that circumstance with the kind of transactional elements of pay. So lots of variability in the background noise suggests that we kind of protect employees from that. Because if you're going up and down on the heaving deck of a ship, it's not your fault maybe if you can't always attain the highest levels of performance at an individual level. So in those kinds of circumstances, we might think about the design of reward systems which emphasize base pay to limit the degree of incentives that we put in place. So we emphasize large base pay elements, relatively low incentive portions. Conversely, if the organization is relatively stable, and so everything's on an even keel, we know what we're dealing with from one year to the next, then that provides a stable basis upon which employees can shine if that's what they're capable of and that's what they're motivated to do. So in those kinds of circumstances, it probably makes more sense to include a more substantial incentive element of rewards, that employees have the opportunity to be able to shine in those kinds of situations. So we don't have to worry so much about providing that stability of base pay. We can perhaps be a little less generous with base and put more resources into incentive elements because they have the opportunity to do that. If we think about the nature of individual performance, where employees' performance is very stable, very easily measured, if we know that this person's work is very good and we've got a huge amount of certainty about just how good that is, there's little doubt. We can measure what they do, we can see where their performance comes from. It's not the result of the interaction of a million different variables, it's because of them. We're very clear about their performance, where it comes from, what it is. Then again, that gives us a foundation to be able to emphasize monetary rewards and to have a large monetary element of their reward package. That's fair because that's under their control. On the other hand, if we've got employees whose performance is very much tied to all kinds of different variables, they're not in control of the outcomes of their work, that they depend upon cooperation with others, with other organizational actors, with all kinds of complex circumstances. If we're not even very clear what their performance might be because of the nature of the work is difficult to measure, because objectives change, that they're constantly having to deal with new situations, then again, it would be demotivating, it would be unfair, it would be the cause of dissatisfaction if we were to include a large monetary element that was linked to performance. So here we would seek to, if we were going to place any degree of focus on performance here at all, we'd probably do it using non-monetary elements, a wider range of rewards, non-financial rewards, praise, those kinds of things, because they provide much less risk. They are a much less likely source of dissatisfaction and demotivation in this kind of circumstance. So we can, choose our responses to rewards depending upon circumstances, much more of a contingency-based approach that would be appropriate in certain circumstances. At a broad level, how can we design performance-based systems so that we avoid falling into bear traps? Some broad questions of good practice. Some relatively familiar, that we make sure that we line our approaches up with other elements within the HR function so that the systems that we put in place are congruent, that they match both the HR strategy and the broader corporate strategy. But also that we think very carefully about how much resource we need to put into this. Now, given that things like merit pay and performance-related pay are supposed to be the magic bullet. They're the thing that unlock the key. They're the key that unlocks employee performance. Organisations often put a surprisingly limited amount of resource into this, and then are surprised when people aren't that heavily motivated by the outcome. So we've got to think, how much are we going to resource this? What is the payout going to be for employees? Now, there's some evidence to suggest that the average payout under a merit pay scheme is around about 4%. But we also know that people don't really sit up and take notice until the payout or the potential payout gets substantially more than that, maybe even as much as around 10% of wages. So given the controversial nature of these schemes, and given the amount of resource that we need to put into administering these kinds of schemes, if we're not going to put enough monetary resources into them, it does beg the question of whether we should bother doing them at all. And that if we're really going to do it, we've got to put some serious money behind it. We also have to think about the applicability of these schemes right the way across organisations. In some parts of the organisation, these kinds of schemes might be really obvious, really straightforward. That if you've got a sales function, if you've got a part of the organisation that generates revenue, then targets, performance measures, and the provision of rewards on the basis of those might seem really clear, really obvious. But then other parts of the organisation that are maybe more about process, about support functions, about back office activities, to what extent can they be included in these schemes? Should we try and include them, or should we leave them out? What are the standards that we're going to make use of? How do we define and measure the objectives that we're trying to reward when we look at what it is that employees do? How do we make these clear enough that they satisfy our desire for fairness? Are they going to be seen as both procedurally and distributively just? What do we do about the kind of funding stream for these kinds of schemes? Do these schemes, because they're linked to performance generally, do they only pay out when extra revenue is generated by that performance? In which case, what happens when organisations hit a bad patch and that employees may be doing very well, working very hard, performing at the level that they're expected to, but because the organisation hasn't generated additional revenue, how does the scheme get funded? And what happens to motivation of employees in those bad years for the organisation? So there are lots of different issues to consider. It's not a magic wand. It's not a silver bullet. There's lots of difficult choices that organisations need to think very carefully about because of this area of rewards controversy and because of the difficulties of putting this kind of system into place in practice.